For those who don't remember this episode, I don't blame you. This is the one where a weapons manufacturer named Coven is accused by 7 of 9 of having violated her by harvesting nanoprobes unconsensually in order to make weapons. The memories come back to 7 via hypnosis by the doctor after she experiences many physical and emotional responses, specifically when around Coven and medical equipment. Eventually, Coven flees from fear of persecution. He dies while in pursuit, and the crew, presuming him innocent, feel immense guilt from it. This episode's purposeful theme was on repressed memories, hypnosis, and the practice's validity. But it's undeniable that although this was the intended statement, the entire playout of the episode can very easily be taken as a metaphor for sexual assault. The discussion here has been made before. Many people have talked about what this episode did wrong and right, and why it's disliked by so many. Myself included. Retrospect let me down, and left me feeling aggrieved. But beyond my own initial reactions, I wanted to understand this episode. Empathy is a pretty strong force, and when used, can save lives. So let's talk about it. Most of the background into the cultural context of when the episode aired, I got from the Women at Warp podcast, where they talk about this episode. Link will be in the description. They have a much more in-depth conversation about the context and the story in general, and I highly recommend you go check it out. I'll summarize a bit. In the 90s, when this episode was written, the theme of repressed memories was making its way into media everywhere, and its popularity was influenced by the Satanic Panic, which, in brief, is the huge irrational fear adults held at the time that things like Dungeons & Dragons and heavy metal music were corrupting their children into satanic beliefs. At the time, there were so-called psychologists and psychiatrists writing specifically about the practice of hypnosis in order to recover repressed memories of experiences with satanic cults, while profiting off of it. Some of the claims made regarding the cults can be quite far-fetched, but nevertheless, it was used as evidence by police and investigators. And it was that hysteria around children being influenced by shady psychiatrists who are planting ideas of abuse in their heads. That was the main commentary in this episode. I think there is an interesting story to be told with the metaphor of repressed memories and the question of their validity. However, this one was done pretty irresponsibly. The episode not only falls very short when held up to the present day, but arguably could have been handled in a much better way, even for the time. It would have been easy to write any of the characters a repressed memories storyline, and the topic, as well as that of sexual assault, makes for complex writing that Star Trek could have done justice. When starting to read more about this episode, a statement made by Brian Fuller, one of the writers, stood out as a big problem with the execution of the episode. He acknowledged the awareness they had of the sexual assault aspects in the story, and that their decision to remove any direct sexual themes was a choice. It seems irresponsible to assume that no explicit sexual aspects negate any kind of metaphor, especially on Star Trek, and specifically in a case where the language and portrayal of the stories is so spot on with that said metaphor you were aware of. Multiple words and phrases used throughout the episode seem a little on the nose and stand out.
7 was the victim of a brutal assault.
Our investigation has suddenly turned into a manhunt.
Everything led me to believe that you were a victim.
He is not an innocent man. I know what he did to me. He violated me.
That goes hand in hand with the performances we're shown. Jeri Ryan's acting in this episode sends chills down my spine. She's just phenomenal. From the first scene, before any mention of repressed memories or assault, you can feel the tension. Her reactions to the medical examination make your skin itch. Even her voice is softer than her usual mechanical tone. Eventually, she has a full panic attack while on the table and is left utterly confused. It's hard to watch. During the doctor's test of hypnosis on 7, she starts to relive her repressed memories. By the end of the experiment, we have experienced a full 7 minutes of these memories in vivid detail along with her. Not in some cryptic dreamlike state we've seen before, but in crisp scenes, fully played out with us. It's told to the audience and to Janeway that there was physical evidence in Seven's hippocampus that her memory was being affected or repressed by something. Partnering that with the lived-in memories we experience right after, we have no reason not to believe Seven. Coven's reactions throughout the entire ordeal don't help the audience feel sympathy for him either. His combative instincts, while understandably angry after being hit in the face, he's constantly on edge and quick to attack or deflect. Eventually he flees in fear of being convicted, and while in pursuit, Voyager pleads with him to cooperate. He fires at them first, giving fate to his own death. The striking mirror held up by Coven's reactions towards his fear of conviction to real life is uncomfortable, to say the least. His claims that even accusation of a crime like this would ruin his career inside his society, a reaction to the assault itself and not that it's a repressed memory, that detail definitely did not age well. The point here is, to act like the absence of explicit sexual themes excuses any kind of implied metaphor is pretty ill-considered, as writers, as an audience, and as critics. A particular problem I have with this episode is how the story affects the characters and their arcs, as individuals, as a crew, and as a family. Seven is like the crew's child, if not child, then baby sister, as they've all been doing their part to influence her, teaching her to grow into her humanity.
You're rude.
I am rude.
Together now.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine.
That's the way. Right into your mouth. Okay? Just like a little scout ship flying into a shuttle bay.
Seven.
Don't be alarmed. I won't hurt you.
None more important than the Doctor and Captain Janeway herself. This story was written at the expense of the relationships that we're building between the characters. It isn't as if all Trek characters don't have some inconsistency in their writing, but Janeway's reaction to this situation feels like a major fumble. Her strictly diplomatic approach rather than a staunch defense of her crew member feels out of character, at least when she's not trying to calm down the hot-headed Coven and his ego. She does not take the position of judge, but jury. Janeway isn't even an investigator. She assigns that position to the Doctor, who also happens to be the psychologist, all while she continues to infantilize Seven, rarely ever even addressing her throughout the episode. The relationship between the two women was still young, Seven having only been on the ship for less than a year. The mentor position Janeway takes can double that of a parent, even referring to Seven as having been behaving herself before the events take place.
She's been behaving herself lately.
Janeway never really showed any signs that she believed Seven. She deals with it like a political and detached Starfleet captain would.
Did you find any other physical evidence of the medical procedures she described? We don't want to make accusations against an innocent man.
And this was an opportunity to have Janeway really help Seven deal with trauma. On the other hand, the Doctor, being the other strongest relationship Seven has with a crew member, is put in a terrible position that's a huge conflict of interest. To both investigate the supposed crime in order to find proof, remaining impartial, while also being Seven's doctor and psychologist, an impossible spot to be in that ultimately leads to betrayal of Seven's trust.
You know that's not right. Tell them.
Everything led me to believe that you were a victim. But if I'm to be impartial, we can't ignore the fact that this evidence supports Coven's story, and not yours.
Not just of others, but of herself and her own feelings.
You were the one who helped me to understand what happened, and now you're denying it.
It's the Doctor's remorse, not Seven's, that's the focus of the episode. Janeway gives the Doctor forgiveness for his mistakes, but blames Seven for hers. No matter what the truth is, whatever Seven is feeling is very real and scary to her. As Michelle Green puts it in her review, if Seven is ever harassed by a member of Voyager's crew, will she feel protected and empowered to speak up? Or will she obey Janeway's repeated dictums that she must think of the good of the community before she opens her mouth and causes more trouble? In reality, it's still a fact that false reporting of sexual assault is extremely rare, and claiming otherwise puts stigma and pressure on victims. This episode punishes that victim. Finally, I have one last bone to pick with this episode, and it stems from a bigger issue around 7 of 9. Besides the usually absolutely spectacular writing given to her, the themes and questions her story and character provide, the opportunities she gives plot-wise, and not to mention Jeri Ryan's performance of her, there's no denying that 7 of 9's physical design was a product of her time. Numerous ways exist to have written any of the characters a repressed memory story. Where's Tuvok and his psychic abilities now? Paris and Kim could make great subjects for an away mission gone wrong, put to test in some species' ancient rituals. Even Janeway could present a really cool story. The captain of the ship inflicted with fake memories, causing her to make ill-advised decisions. The choice to give the one that they already proved they were aware could have sexual assault themes to the young blonde woman wearing a skin-tight catsuit was, not subtle. There's no doubt that many people involved in her creation and promotion wanted to sell it through sex. The character promo shoots are enough to prove that. At the time, that alone had stirred up enough controversy to begin with. It's not a secret that 7 is presented in the image of a male fantasy. And the character does more than prove herself as a fully realized person, with the writing to show for it. Jeri Ryan has stated many times that the writing far outweighed the sexual presentation of her character, which is true, but that doesn't change her physical presentation. Nevertheless, it feels careless to give said character a story in which she has been physically violated at the hands of a man. So why talk about this? I recently started watching Voyager after years of putting it off. I can't lie, after watching the new Picard, I felt the giddiness over seeing 7 of 9 return. A character I barely knew, but was certain I wanted to, especially now. So I dove in, and I was not disappointed. Voyager is filled with beautiful nuggets of inspiration, lessons on humanity and morality, and a fun, down-to-earth crew who you feel lost in space along with. When I hit season 4, it felt like a treat. 7's addition to the show worked great, and the opportunities she gave for the statements it wanted to make built on this ever-evolving philosophy of Star Trek. My first reaction to Retrospect was pretty visceral. Maybe I was doomed from the start. With no background knowledge, the Netflix description read, 7 of 9 claims to have been assaulted by the arms trader. After finishing it, I wasn't just annoyed, I was mad. I was upset and let down. It was the reaction of a 23-year-old woman in the year 2020, and I think that's worth talking about. That anger was real to me, and I'm aware my own presumptions about the story influenced it for me, but I spent the whole episode thinking it would end in 7's corner. That was hard to reconcile with right away. Further research talked down my initial reaction into understanding, as it sometimes can. We as an audience should be able to compare two different cultural contexts, understand its differences, appreciate it for what it is, while still holding the original context accountable. It's hard to forgive Retrospect for its faults. The episode has been described as offensive and possibly one of the sexist Star Trek episodes in the whole series' history, and I have to agree. That feeling in the pit of my stomach after watching it for the first time is evidence enough of that. The problems with Retrospect aren't easily dismissible, but being able to use research and writing to explore my opinions and feelings gives me a chance to grow. Discussions and ideas are what makes all of us grow and become better people, and maybe our 24th century will be a little better because of it.
Well, I wouldn't put it like that.
Ashmore and I had to hold her back.